Cass County investigators are hoping you have some information that could help them crack a cold case. This is a photo of Rachel Anthony. Rachel was killed on February 27th of 2001, and her killer sadly was never found. Rachel was last seen while working her shift at Ultimate Liquors in Pine River, Minnesota. And Pine River is a really small town. Only about 950 people live there within the city limits. So you can bet people in the community have been talking about this case for years now. One of those people, an investigator for Cass County, he is actually assigned to this case, and I spoke with him this week.
One thing that I'm exceptionally proud of is, I tell people that I'm essentially third generation in law enforcement and to this agency. My dad had retired from this agency as a sheriff in 2010. Unfortunately, we've had several of those cases over the years that have gone unsolved and have grown cold, and it's sad. That takes a lot out of our current and former law enforcement, because you can just tell that's always bothered them, that we haven't been able to to finalize or capitalize on a case like that. And I know for a fact it still bothers him to this day. I know the investigator that was assigned to it, early on when the case first, occurred. I know that bothered him, all those years, and still does. So that's just all the more a driving force for us to keep trying. The Pine River Police Department noticed Rachel Anthony's car outside the liquor store running. It was cold that night. I believe it was below zero. It was extremely cold. They thought that was suspicious, and upon further investigation, they realized that she was no longer in the store. They recognized that she was a liquor store clerk, and they realized that her purse, a lot of her personal belongings, were still there inside the store. The front door had been locked. There was no real sign of any sign of a struggle that was immediately apparent. But yeah, it was pretty common that they would go out the back door. But yeah, the car was still running in the parking lot, and she was nowhere to be found. So that began our investigation, and as a missing persons report.
And who found her body?
I was a group of kids that were out horseback riding, and they had found her. She was just off the side of the road in kind of a ravine in a rural area. So I believe it was probably more likely, being that they're riding horseback, that they could kind of see down a little bit further, and that's why nobody else had located her.
You said there was an officer, right, who ended up driving by. Can you tell me a little bit more about that particular part?
Pine River is a small town, pretty close-knit community. So, the local officer would have a pretty good idea of like the comings and goings, that type of thing. So he happened to drive by. The liquor store closes at 10. So this was about, I think our time of call was about 1 a.m. So I don't recall exactly what time it was that he, first came across the vehicle and found it suspicious, but certainly you would have expected her to be gone at that point. So the car had been running for quite a bit of time. So kind of heads up on his part. He would stop to investigate that, and that's ultimately what led to the discovery of her disappearance.
And I'm imagining at the beginning, with this being a small town, the reactions from people in the community had to be shocking.
Absolutely. And even to this day, obviously we're coming up on a very important milestone, being 25 years. And it's remarkable. I've only had this case for, several years now, as, I've become an investigator. And but I've always been aware of the Rachel Anthony case. And, this time of year, especially, right around February, we always seem to get an uptick in leads, so that just tells me that, the community is still. And that's why it's important to us. It's important to us to, continue to share Rachel's story, and and that just shows that the community still. This is an important case. The community still feels for Rachel, and they still want to see a resolution. So it's nice to see that uptick in leads about this time of year, because again, Rachel's story is on everybody's mind.
I'm sorry to cut you off. With the uptick in leads, is there anything that has stood out? Has there been some indication that could get you, even closer to finding an answer and solving this?
Yeah, they could be as simple as, a lot of times it's just, like looking back on a few of them that I've read recently, it can be, somebody just had a bad feeling about somebody, somebody that, maybe somebody had been in an abusive relationship and always had just that feeling that maybe, their ex-partner could have something to do with Rachel's disappearance. Also, there's always been, we've also had a lot of, and I guess this wouldn't necessarily be connected with the small town community, but we've also had a lot of similar types of cases that have happened across the country, and so we've worked closely over the years with several different jurisdictions that learned about Rachel's disappearance and had a case that was similar and wanted to kind of swap notes, if you will. Yeah, a lot of it's usually kind of centered around an individual that people either had a feeling about or yeah, pretty much it. Like they've always kind of suspected somebody.
Yeah, now that we're, 20 plus years out, is there a concern that the person might not even be alive anymore?
That's always, yeah, I mean, that's always been a concern of mine. The sheriff and I were just discussing, and she would have been 75 now. And, that's always been a concern that, yeah, that individual could very well have passed away. Another, just on the subject of time, we're also, science is constantly improving, forensic science processes are always improving. And we've, there, several years ago, we resubmitted a lot of her clothing and physical evidence from the case in hopes that we might, be able to identify, DNA or, again, processes are continuously improving. There's private labs that we've looked at, that might be able to assist in, breaking the case, maybe getting some additional leads.
Of course, people would say now, of course, we have so many, there are Ring cameras, Nest cameras, and all of these, pieces of security that we have access to. At that time, though, it's 2001. No cameras, I'm assuming?
So unfortunately, the cameras were inoperable at the liquor store. There was security camera footage in the Pine River area. I guess I would just add that, having gone through, literally thousands of pages of documents, that were created during this time frame. All the follow-up work that was done, both on the Cass County Sheriff's Office part, the BCA. It was phenomenal the amount of work that went into this case and continues to. But yeah, just to be able to look at, how they, there was some video surveillance footage from, I believe it was the Holiday Station. And everybody that was in and out of that store had been, contacted or tracked down. It's that type of work happens so quickly nowadays, and this was just good old fashioned boots on the ground police work that was being done back then. And, I can honestly say, looking back on it, with a fresh pair of eyes and looking at that case, there's not one thing that I can say, that maybe that should have been done. They didn't leave any stone unturned. It was very impressive to go back and look at all the work that was done in those early stages of that investigation leading up to, her being located 6 weeks later.
So much time has passed, and when it comes to some of these cold cases, how do you deal with that? Does it sit with you? Tell us about that and that feeling.
Yeah, these always leave an open wound in the community. This is something that we think someone knows something about, and we're just waiting for someone to have the courage to step forward and help us solve this and bring answers to her family and justice to the victim. We see all the time on different TV shows, nationally syndicated programs, where the cases like this are solved. So we know we're one piece of evidence, we're one tip away from a resolution in this case. And we're just hoping someone that has the courage to come forward is willing to do that now and help bring justice to Rachel.
We are getting close to the anniversary. Have there been any tips that have come in so far this month?
Yes, I was just actually speaking with the BCA agent this morning, and there was a tip that we're going to follow up on, or planning on following up on tomorrow. Yeah, there's been a couple this week, or just this week alone, that I'm aware of that have come in. And yeah, it's always just that, it's kind of just that little bit of excitement every time you get the email or a phone call, that this could be it. This could be the one. And, unfortunately, we've had a lot of those over the years, and, that unfortunately those have, kind of come with a letdown at the end, but that's what makes it all the more worthwhile is, just that next lead could be the one.
It's for the people listening, where can they go if they maybe have any piece of information? And it doesn't matter, I'm guessing how big or small. Where do they need to call, or where can they place that information online?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can call the 1-800 number here at the sheriff's office, which is 800-450-2677. Otherwise, the non-emergency number is 218-547-1424. Also, the BCA, the 651-793-7000, and their toll-free number is 877-996-6222. And of course, they can also look at our website as well as the BCA's website. There's also, they can remain anonymous as well. There's, the Crime Stoppers website. There's a lot of different ways that they can remain anonymous.